Okay, so let's move on to class cards. So I'm going to start with Druid. So first off, we have Druid of the Flame, which is a 3 cost, and you can turn it into either a 5/2 minion or a 2/5 minion. Now, I think pretty much everyone's going to want to pick the 2/5 choice because just for longevity. But 2/5 for 3, it's a good stat line. 5 for 2, 5/2 not so much. I don't really see that being used that much. It's also definitely good for buffing, particularly Mark of Nature and Mark of the Wild. You know, the +2/+2/+2 and taunt, or +4 attack or +4 health and taunt. So essentially, you could create a really beefy minion with 2 cards. So that's something that could be very interesting and have a lot of potential. Next up, we have a bit of an odd one. We have the Volcanic Lumberer, a 9 cost, 7 attack, 8 health minion. So, you know, it's not the best of stat lines, and it has taunt and costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. Now, the problem I have with this card is not many Druid decks are aggro. You're very hard pressed to find an aggro Druid deck. I run an aggro Druid deck. I run a Murloc Druid aggro deck, simply because I think it's a very interesting combination and I think it's a lot of fun to do. However, you don't find that with most Druids. You know, most Druids play a patient, longer game, or they play Ramp Druid. It doesn't rely a lot on taking out minions quickly. You know, it's a case of, okay, we'll knock over this minion, we'll knock over this minion, and you'll do it very slowly. So I don't really see a lot of value coming out of the Volcanic Lumberer, but I could be wrong. Next up, we have the Hunter, and I can see a lot of professional players getting very, very angry about this, because it's going to create a new level of aggro face Hunter, which is pretty much plagued the metagame of it since Goblins versus Gnomes. And both of these cards have the mechanic of, if your hand is empty. And essentially what it is, you have Quick Shot, which is a 2 cost spell, which deals 3 damage, and if your hand is empty, you draw a card. Okay, so essentially what it's saying is, we want you to push as hard as you possibly can, to go as aggro as far as you can, so that when you play this card, dealing 3 damage, and your hand is empty when you play it, you get to draw another card and continue your aggro. Insanity. Next up, we have the Core Rager. 4/4/4, which is an alright stat line. You know, it's not the best, but it's pretty good. And if your hand is empty, gain +3/+3. This is insanity. I think Blizzard are truly trying to set up Hunters to be the most aggro class possible, and I can see these potentially, well, I could see at least the Core Rager being potentially nerfed, because that is a lot of damage incoming from that, because the aggro Hunter is not very popular anyway. I mean, it's popular to those that use it, but to those who face it, they're constantly complaining that the aggro Hunter deck is just ridiculous. So, and these cards definitely add to that. But it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. Next up, we have the Mage cards, and I think both of these reflect on potential for a new idea to create a new control mage in the metagame when all these cards become available. First off, we have Dragon's Breath, which is a 5 cost, deal 4 damage. Poor spell generally, but its effect, which is cost 1 less for each minion that died this turn. Now, Mage has a lot of control anyway, with the likes of Flame Strike, Blizzard, and Arcane Explosion for their area of effect, as well as Arcane Missiles, and a bunch of other spells to kind of keep control of the board. So, you combo the spell with Flame Strike, you could essentially take out a middle to, like, weak board, and then use Dragon's Breath to take out the strongest minion of the lot. Say that's, like, an 8 health minion. But, this is a really interesting card, and I really like to see how it gets used and put together. Definitely want to watch out for. Next up, we have the Flamewalker, a 2/4/3, which seems to become a more common stat line. And after you cast a spell, deal 2 damage split randomly between enemies. So essentially, what this has done has buffed Arcane Missiles from 3 damage up to 5, and essentially is also furthering the idea of Control Mage, because what you're doing is you're splitting this damage and being like, right, okay, let's kind of control the board as much as possible and contain the board. I think it's also, while the Hunter cards are becoming very aggro, Mage is becoming very anti-aggro and being like, right, okay, yes, we see all the complaints about this aggro deck, all these aggro decks, but hang on, why don't we give you this option to create a new control new type of control deck. So that's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of it. Next up we have the Paladin cards, and first off we have Solemn Vigil, a spell, 5 cost, which is draw 2 cards, which I don't really consider to be that great value. Its effect, however, is, once again, the cost 1 less for each minion that died this turn. Now, I feel that that's only really viable if you run the Equality Consecration combo, which is used a lot in Paladin decks. So, also it works well with Avenging Wrath, if you're into that. So, the thing is, yes, okay, that could give you a bit of a card advantage. However, you're relying on these 2 other cards to get decent value, and your opponent having a lot of minions ready to take care of in order to get good value out of those cards. So it's an iffy one. Next up we have obvious dragon synergy, and I really like it. It's the Dragon Consort, a 5/5 for 5 mana, and essentially what it is, the next dragon that you play costs 2 less. Paladin dragon deck, so yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done with that card. Carrying on, next up we have the Priest. We have the Twilight Whelp, a 1 cost, 2/1 minion, so not bad, could be better. 1 health does make it kind of vulnerable to a lot of hero powers though. However, if you're holding a dragon, gain +2 health, so more obvious dragon synergy, and if you can turn it into a 2/3, then it's actually a pretty decent minion. However, it could be quite susceptible to silence, but I think there are better targets for a silence, so it depends on how much you'd want to stop any early progress made by the Twilight Whelp. Next up, we have a spell that I feel has been a long time coming, and I'm surprised this wasn't added either in Goblins vs. Gnomes or even the original game. It's Resurrect. It's simply summon back a random friendly minion that died during the game. So, you know, I feel like that would obviously be used mostly in the late game, or if you were able to get out a strong minion early, and it was like a taunt minion, you're like, right, okay, I want to bring this back, and it's been the only minion that's died, so bring it back, boom, taunt minion. So, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot of interesting potential that come out of that, but if you leave it to the late game, you can have a lot of fun with it. You can have a very strong random aspect, so that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I'd probably only run 1 in a priest deck though, so keep that in mind. Next, we have Rogue, and first we have Gang Up. Choose a minion and shuffle 3 copies of that minion into your deck. That is very, very interesting, and I think that could lead to a lot of potential very interesting combos, and maybe the return of Miracle Rogue, which is essentially the idea where you essentially build up your hand and then unleash this crazy combo to flip the table and pretty much win the match. So be interesting to see what kind of comes out of that. And then next up we have the Dark Iron Stalker, a 4/3 for 5, which is not great. Rogues do have a history of not having great stat lines with some of their cards, but deal 2 damage to all undamaged enemy minions as the battle cry is kind of interesting. It's another anti-aggro card, clearly. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what kind of comes out of that, to see if it sort of stops aggro decks in a way, or definitely helps stop aggro decks. And I think it's a really good card. It could be a really good card. And the Shaman cards this time are just absolutely fantastic. First off, we have the Fireguard Destroyer, 3/6 for 4, so pretty decent. You know, actually, I really like the stat line. And then the Battle Cry is gain 1 to 4 attack, so more RNG, but definitely not an issue. And this was already a good card as a 3/6, but to have that buff on the way makes it absolutely fantastic. Yes, it has an overload of 1, which means you have 1 less mana crystal next turn, but that is not going to be a problem with the next card, Lava Shock. 2 cost, deal 2 damage, unlocks all your overloaded crystals. So that could be so much value, and I think we could see a lot of overload Shaman decks coming in the near future, and essentially comboing this with Lava Shock, unlocking all your crystals, boom, let the insanity commence. So yeah, that could be very interesting to see what happens to Shaman decks in the future. Next up we have Warlock, the Imp Gang Boss, a 2/4 for 3, so once again that stat line coming back. An okay card with an okay effect, which is pretty much every time this minion takes damage you summon 1/1 Imp. So kind of okay. I think this is kind of more demonology synergy, you know, synergy with all the other demon cards. Mal'Ganis that was added in the last expansion, a lot of power with that. Next up we have Demon Wrath, deal 2 damage to all non-demon minions, so obviously more focus on creating demon-centric decks, and I think that's very interesting and is something I am going to want to do in the future. And finally, last but not least, we have the Warrior. First off, we have the Axe Flinger, a 2/5 for 4, which is it's not uncommon to have that stat line, but it is pretty poor. And whenever this minion takes damage, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So a lot of potential enrage value, but it might not really work that well. And if that gets silenced, then you just have this 2/5 body sort of sitting there, not really doing very much. And we also have Revenge, which is essentially just a worse version of Mortal Strike. Deal 1 damage, so there's potential enrage synergy there, or maybe just finishing off a minion. Auto combo with Execute. However, if you have 12 or less health, you can deal 3 damage instead. So, not that great, but it has potential. It has potential for enraging, particularly for that 1 damage effect. Okay, so I'm done. That was a lot of talking. This has taken nearly half an hour to record. This might end up being split into 2 pieces. It might just end up being one really long video. I haven't decided that yet, but thank you for watching. If you watched it all the way through, I really appreciate that. I hope this wasn't too confusing to those of you that don't play Hearthstone, but I very much doubt you will be watching this if you haven't played Hearthstone. Okay, whew, that was a lot of talking. Okay, I'm the Gaming Dave. I'll see you next time.